Welcome into the EMAW Online Postgame Podcast. Mason Voth, Alec, Busse here with you from EMAW Online, a part of Rivals, as we continue our season-long coverage of the Kansas State Wildcats, who yet again won yesterday. And it's always weird when you can go through a game and everybody feels positive left and right after beating Oklahoma, and then you follow it up with a game that has all the same emotions that the rest of the season had prior to the Oklahoma game. So you had the ecstasy and excitement of the first drive of the game where you sit there and say to yourself, oh crap, this team they've got it figured out. They're going to roll. And they should have. I mean, K-State should have rolled and dominated that first quarter. They did not. And they allowed Tech to get back into it. They go through an offensive lull, which has been something that has been seen a lot over the Chris Kleiman era. And you start to feel that tightness that was there against Tulane. Well, then eventually they figure it out again. Adrian Martinez comes through, saves the day. He's got 9 total touchdowns over the last 2 games, and he did it again with his legs yesterday. So he was phenomenal. Deuce Vaughn had a good day on the ground yesterday, which is even more impressive when you consider the fact that he was dealing with an injury at one point in the game that looked semi-serious based off the amount of attention he was getting on that. So it was a weird game yesterday, and I'm sure anybody that was at home or a couple of the guys that I know that were riding the emotional roller coaster of it, you probably had some serious ups and downs, but ultimately K-State has won. They're 2-0, and they're one of 3 teams in the Big 12 now that's 2-0 in conference play, being KU, K-State, and Oklahoma State. So you're one of the 3 teams in the driver's seat right now, and you get to go to Ames next week against a team that looked horrible offensively, and I don't know that they can trust their kicker either. That was we'll save it for later.
Kansas's defense.
I think it was more about the. Well, I just think it was a weird game in general. Like, those teams should not have played to a 14-11 game. Iowa State's offense isn't great,
so I don't know what happened.
But like KU's got more offense than that, so it was a weird game. But I think there were enough flaws seen in Iowa State that offense isn't all that scary. Their defense is still very, very good. They know what they're doing there, but Matt Campbell got flat out coached in that game, and it was easy to see at the very end because it was 4th and a foot or whatever, and you already had your kicker miss horribly 2 times in the game, and you say, okay, do we trust ourselves to run the ball against Kansas's bad defense? I mean, statistically, Kansas was a terrible defense going into yesterday, and Matt Campbell says, no, you know what? We're going to give it to the kicker again. Let him do it. And he absolutely pushes it to the left. It was nasty. It was gross. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. So 3 missed kicks yesterday for Iowa State, and that certainly makes things feel a little bit more comfortable for K-State going to Ames next weekend. But for what the Wildcats experienced yesterday, let's start with the positives, which would be Adrian Martinez was fantastic yesterday, and I would even throw into the mix that the defense continues to do enough and do the big things at the right time, where yesterday the yards were at a high number again, but ultimately in the Big 12, guys are going to put up yards. As long as they're not putting up points with it, that's really all that matters. And they got key turnovers yesterday too, something that has now happened in every game this season outside of Oklahoma, which neither team turned it over. But every other game, including the Tulane game, the defense has stepped up. And now that you've done it through 5 games this season, I tend to believe that that's the real deal, and that's going to continue.
Yeah, I feel like I wrote after the game that nothing really matters for the defense at this point, except that they're giving Kansas State an opportunity to win football games. And when you look at the big picture of things, that's kind of what they've done, especially in the last 2 games in the Big 12. They've given up more than 1,000 combined yards the last 2 weeks. That's obviously a pretty gaudy, pretty ugly number for a defense. And I think if you were to ask Joe Klanderman, is that up to your standard? He would obviously say no. They've also given up a combined 62 points, close to 700 combined passing yards. Those are all things that I think Kansas State would probably say is not up to their standard. But at the end of the day, they're playing good enough to give the offense an opportunity to score enough points to win the football game. And that's what they need to do. And the offense is capitalized, and they've played complementary football, and they've done that. And I found Joe Klanderman's press conference on Thursday very interesting, Mason, because he bluntly said, there's this stereotype and I'm not quoting him, but he was like, there's this stereotype or this belief that the Big 12 is an offensive gun and run conference that puts up a ton of points. But for a while there, the league swung to the defensive side, and it didn't get that national conversation about how good the defenses were in the Big 12. I mean, Lincoln Riley's defense has improved the last couple of years at Oklahoma. We know what Dave Aranda has been able to do with his teams down in Waco with Baylor. Obviously, Iowa State's had some pretty good defenses the last couple of years as they've been a little bit more successful as well. And Kansas State's always had a pretty solid group under Klanderman. So the defense in the Big 12 has been improved, but now he starts to say that it's swinging back towards the offense. And I think a lot of that has to do with teams like Texas Tech and Zach Kitley's offense, which is just so explosive. And obviously what Jeff Lebby can do down in Norman, Oklahoma, or Kansas State fans saw that firsthand last week. And you put those things together, and it's just tough on defenses to go out there and consistently have a really good week in and week out. And I actually think the defense has played pretty well. It's tough to evaluate if you just look at the numbers. And if you just look at the numbers, it's one of those things where you're like, that's not good. The defense isn't playing well. But I feel like against Texas Tech, they only allowed one true explosive play. And it just so happened to be probably the most exciting play of the day, if you really think about it. That one-hand catch down the sideline that Cleveland had, where he was able to fight off Echo Boydo and then kind of drag him like a rag doll for 15 or 20 yards down the sideline. I think you and I are sitting next to each other in the press box like, whoa. Like,
Yeah,
how do
you
you
don't
do
see
that?
many guys make that kind of catch and then just keep trucking for the next 10 yards. It was impressive.
Normally you don't see guys combine those two skill sets of brute force and incredible athleticism to make the catch, and Cleveland did that, so it's kind of interesting. But that was really the one true explosive play that they allowed yesterday, and they allowed two against Oklahoma, I feel like, and they both went for touchdowns. So maybe look at it from that perspective with the defense, that they're not really allowing too many explosive plays, and the offense is capitalizing and having a lot of explosive plays, which is leading to high point totals for the K-State offense, which it wasn't great throwing the ball, but they might have something really lethal running the ball.
Also, I got this wrong. OSU and TCU played their first conference games yesterday. So K-State and KU are the only two teams with two conference wins right now. They're both 2-0. OSU and TCU are 1-0. And then you've got the 3 1-1s, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Texas. And then Iowa State, Oklahoma, and West Virginia are all 0-2. I feel confident in saying West Virginia is still the worst team in the league. I thought maybe they would show a little bit of fight yesterday in Austin, and they did not. They did the total opposite of that. They got hammered. And in addition to that, then they lost C.J. Donaldson to a really scary injury last night. So West Virginia is not in a good place right now. Thinking about some of the other things from the game for K-State that stood out to me, that was the game all year that people were waiting for from Felix Anudike-Uzomah. He gets the 3 sacks. He gets a forced fumble. He got after it yesterday, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Khalid Duke was doing more stuff on the defensive line with him, and that might be something that, I mean, I know that you feel like you have capable guys there, but that's something that we probably see a lot more throughout the rest of the season, because if those guys together can wreak a lot of havoc, that's something that you just can't avoid. I know that you probably like some of the versatility and some of the things that you can do with Duke. Like when you play him kind of at like a linebacker position, but the results kind of speak for themselves with how they played yesterday. And that was fun to see, because those are always exciting plays. And both of those guys just got back out there and did what they had to do. One of the sacks, it may have been one that Khalid Duke got credit on. It wasn't really like he actually got to Donovan Smith. He just blew through an offensive lineman and shoved the offensive lineman back in like the ankles of Smith, and that tripped him up. So that was just one of those things that stands out in the game of the force that they use. So the defense, I felt pretty good about. It was good to see some of the turnovers get made. I mean, Austin Moore, the interception he had, he made it look easy diving in there and securing that. So they played well. And then offensively, like Adrian Martinez, we know the running looked great. but he still looked confident throwing the football. And to me, that's the most important thing. It wasn't like he was holding anything back there. He was ready to go. The offensive line went through a little bit of a struggle yesterday at a couple of points. And there were times where they had a couple of plays where they were trying to throw it, I think, further down the field and maybe had a guy or two, but he was having to roll out and would have made a really tough throw. And I think if he was at Nebraska and felt like, all right, we got to have this, he probably does try to make those throws, and that's why they end up going the other way. Instead, he was comfortable, and we saw him throw it away a couple of times or just, take a sack or walk off and be good. I think that comes with the confidence and faith that he has in this team that he is on right now, that it's okay not to score points on every drive because you're going to be able to be picked up by the rest of your teammates and you're going to have another chance later. And I just don't know that he ever felt that at Nebraska.
Yeah, I think looking at the defense first, because that's just where I want to go again. Felix Anudike-Uzomah is a freak. Like, holy smokes. What a coming out party for the 2022 season that he had yesterday. That was, I mean, damn. I mean, he had 6 total tackles. I think he had 5 of them by himself, 3 tackles for loss, and they were all sacks, not to mention a forced fumble. That was pretty key in the game, too, that led to Kansas State getting a touchdown to take a touchdown lead, I believe, or to go up 2 scores. I think it actually gave him the lead. Just an incredible day for him. And I like what they did, putting Khalid Duke opposite him. To me, that brings 2 pretty potent rushers off the side. Not that Nate Matlack isn't, but he's got a different skill set than Felix does and Khalid does. So I like that. I like the rotation they've got coming off the edge. And I think that they can kind of mess with some things and they can give offenses some headaches, bringing those guys, especially when you throw in Daniel Green as another guy who's kind of a risky, little frisky rusher when they need him to be. Obviously, Austin Moore's not the most gifted rusher, but he's not someone who's like bad by any means at getting in the backfield. Their front, I guess it's a front 6, not a front 7 because they play a 3-3-5, has been really impressive through the first half of the season as we've kind of experienced that now. And Eli Huggins had a really good game yesterday too. And I'll go to the offense now. Talking about Adrian Martinez and maybe the lull they experienced a bit in the second quarter, I just thought they got really conservative in their play calling. And I think you said it really well yesterday in the press box. They almost want Deuce at times to make a big play so bad that they just keep giving him the ball and expecting him to make a really big play, when sometimes that play is not really there all the time. And I know he had that 69-yard run yesterday to get all the way down inside Texas Tech territory. I think it got him down inside the 5 or at least the 10-yard line. And that was a huge run and a huge momentum swing for Kansas State because I think they ended up getting a touchdown after that. But it's one of those things where they took the ball out of Adrian's hands, I feel like, in the second quarter, where he was really successful in the first quarter. If you think back to some of his early drives, right? I mean, he started the game.
Even real quick, go back before the second quarter. Go back to when they had to settle for field goals in the first quarter. Like, let Adrian try to make a play on second down or third down as opposed to be like, all right, we're going to be safe. We're going to take the field goals here, because the pedals should have been put to the floor and they should have been trying to go for the kill shot in the first quarter. And instead, that's why they're in a 13-10 game at halftime.
Yeah, and I just think that, I mean, he started the game 7 of 8 again last week. And that's what he did against Oklahoma. He completed 6 passes in a row as part of that streak all in the first quarter. And then if you go look at his chart, he didn't have another completion, I don't think, until the second quarter. And it's like, what? Or until the third quarter, maybe. And it's like, well, why not? Like, why are they taking the ball out of his hands? It doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know. I just feel like Colin Klein got really conservative yesterday in the second quarter, and it didn't really make sense to me, but they were able to overcome it. And I will give Colin Klein credit for this in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter. They kind of decided, you know what, we've got something working here with the run game and with Adrian running the football. Let's just keep doing that. And I will give credit for that. They did that, and it worked really well, and it ended up leading to them getting essentially a 2-score lead or a 2-score win.
Yeah, I thought they probably should have gone to Adrian a little bit more often early yesterday. Whether that was in the run game, because we saw what happened once they finally gave him more design run plays, he was able to take off and go and dominate again with his legs. But I'm also a little bit surprised. Like, I let him throw the ball a little bit more. He only attempted 19 passes yesterday. He didn't even get to the 20 pass mark, which at this point, now that what we've seen him do against Oklahoma and Texas Tech, I think you should be letting him throw a little bit more, because now I think you can feel comfortable with what he can do there. And I know it's tough to criticize how any of the numbers play out yesterday, because they still win by 9 points and they were up by 17 late in the fourth quarter. But it didn't feel like that. And I think that there were still a few things that needed to be fixed. And one of the things that I'll point out, and this is a big credit to Chris Kleiman. I'm writing about it, and I'll have a story out about it later today. But Kleiman is in a position right now, and I had this conversation with, of all people, my wife after the game on the way home, because she started talking about, she's like, there were a couple times where he got like really upset. It was like really going after the officials or stuff like that. And I got to thinking, I was like, yeah, we didn't see that early on, but over like the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more of that from Chris Kleiman. And what I think it is, even more so this year, we've seen it. I think he's gotten to a point where he is comfortable now, where he goes, all right, this is my 4th year as a coach in this league. I'm having success again, and I belong here. I feel good about what we're doing. I can go after these guys a little bit and stick up for my guys and try and plead our case a little bit more. And I think we saw that in other areas than just going after the officials when he felt like his team was wronged. I think we see that at halftime, when in both halftime interviews he does. So we have the ESPN Plus, where he ends up going and saying to Shane Sparks at halftime, "We got to nut up." That's an all-time halftime quote.
That's an all-time quote ever. I hope that spreads across Twitter, even though
that needs to be on T-shirts. He gets hired and they put "Win the Dang Day" on T-shirts. Put "We got to nut up" on T-shirts. And then coming out of halftime, he talks to Matt Walters on the K-State Sports Radio Network, and he says to him very confidently, we should be up 21-0. Like, I think the way that he spoke about his team the last couple of weeks, he said it with confidence, and he said it in the right manner and tone each time, where if you think about the Adrian situation, like, he handled that well. He was, pretty stern and pretty confident where he shoveled blame after the Tulane game. And it was the tough love thing that he had to do. But then he understood at what point he needed to do his conversation of, hey, we love you, we believe in you, all of that. Like, he's firing on all cylinders right now. And I think it's because he's become so comfortable and confident in what they're doing that he now truly believes that, like, he's made it and his staff has made it and they belong where they're at. Because when he got hired, he used to always say football is football, because people always would ask what the difference was transitioning from FCS football to the Big 12. And he would just say football is football. I think he has gotten to a point where he has finally proven that. And he is also proving it in the actions that he has in every single way that this thing goes. So I think a lot of credit needs to be given to Chris Kleiman, because I think that the conversations that were had at halftime, and he was, afterwards, this goes to what I'm saying. He told us, like, he was not very happy at halftime. And I think they probably had a real soul-searching conversation, would be the way that people would phrase it when you don't want to, like, go into deep detail as to what happened. But I think that they probably had a pretty serious conversation at halftime about, we need to go. He may have looked at Colin Klein and said, hey, you need to cut it loose this week. Adrian cut it loose. How about you cut it loose, bucko?
I will say Deuce Vaughn said similar things yesterday after the game, where he kind of said, Coach Kleiman doesn't really light into them very often. And that doesn't really surprise me. Mm-hmm. He seems like generally someone who's kind of laid back. He's not the type of coach who's going to be fired up and yelling and throwing stuff and breaking clipboards and doing all that stuff at practice or doing all that stuff in the locker room. That's just not the type of person he is, in my opinion. So I think that, look at you tweeting during the show. That's impressive. Multitasking.
I just hit a retweet. That's all.
That's impressive. Sorry to lose my train of thought here, but he's not someone who I feel like does get really fired up or throw things around like that. But it sounds like he was in halftime, and the team came out and played with their hair on fire in the second half, I would say. They played really, really impressive in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter of the game kind of looked like what you thought the entire game would, or what you thought the entire game would look like after the first 2 drives for Kansas State, right? Like Texas Tech scores 8 points in the fourth quarter because of the 1 touchdown drive, and then they get the 2-point conversion. But the fourth quarter, Kansas State dominated. They put up 17 points in the fourth quarter. And yeah, they got some of them off of a turnover and whatever. But I was expecting that fourth quarter to be really, really exciting. And I think the word I used in the press box yesterday to you was electric. And it really wasn't. Kansas State just kind of took all the energy out of Texas Tech. And that's kind of what you want to see because Kansas State is clearly the better team. And in the fourth quarter, they really dominated Texas Tech, like I said. And they kind of just went and won the game. Like they didn't wait for Texas Tech to make a mistake to win the game. Like Kansas State went and won that football game yesterday by capitalizing off the turnover that Texas Tech had, by Julius Brents getting the interception to kind of seal it after the Texas Tech onside kick that was successful. And Kansas State went and won that football game yesterday in the fourth quarter.
Well, when it's 2020 going into the fourth quarter, I think to myself, all right, this is going to turn into like the game was kind of at a lull and didn't have much going on. Now this game's probably going to end up being really high scoring and back and forth, and it's going to be stressful. And it wasn't. I mean, K-State came out and took care of business, and like the message became clear for them. We need to get after it. They did that, and they were up 37-20 with, less than 5.5 minutes to play, and they're able to hang on and get the job done. So that they played well in the second half, specifically in the fourth quarter. Now you're just going to have to find a way to put it all together. And I think we say that a lot in football, and I think it's really tough to do in football because how many teams can you go look at a box score and be like, all right, they scored 13 in the first, 13 in the second, 13 in the third, 13 in the fourth. Like that would be awesome, but that's just not how the game works. So I think sometimes we're a little hard on that, but there is a flow and a feel that needs to be had at times that lacked in K-State's offense yesterday. And we'll see if they get things moving forward. Real quick, one other note on the comment about like Deuce just needing to go and they don't need to force feed him. I think we see that yesterday because he does still run for just an inordinate amount of yards. So he was fine. He was able to get that taken care of. But like I think that they tried giving it to him too much early on in very basic situations where it was like they got their lead and they're like, all right, we're just going to let Deuce try to bust one loose, or we need to give it to him right now.
Well,
and I think they could pick that up easily.
I think this is a really good example of this from the 8-minute mark of the first quarter all the way to really the 13 mark of the second quarter. Deuce didn't have a run go for more than 2 yards, and he carried it. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. If I can count correctly, I may have missed one. So 6 carries, none of them went for more than 2 yards. And then he had one go for 7 yards, but then he sunk back down to 1 yard and then 4 yards. And then he kind of got one for 9 yards with a minute and a half-ish left in the first half. But in the second half, he kind of got going a little bit more again with carries that were closer to 4 yards per carry. And he had that 69-yard carry like we talked about earlier. He had a 14-yard carry in the third quarter. And I think that they did get in a position where it wasn't option-y. It was off tackles. It was sweeps. It was dives up the middle. It's like, that's not Deuce's game. Deuce's game is in space, and it's Deuce's opportunistic ability to make people miss that makes him an All-American running back. And
well, you need some versatility in it too. Like you can't just run the same thing all the time with the same guy that is your best player, and teams know that because then they'll be ready for it. Like that's why it would have been nice to maybe have seen more throws yesterday at various points in the game.
Or RPOs,
like that's the thing that I think was missing.
RPOs, I think, are something that you could see K-State do a little bit more of in general on the offensive side of the ball. Now that you have to defend so much against Adrian and his running ability, because he runs for 171 yards yesterday, and I believe he was at like 14 yards per carry, which is mind-boggling.
Here's a good question for you. Do you know how many times K-State threw the ball in the second quarter yesterday?
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the answer is 0.
Well, it felt like it. They threw it 3 times in the second quarter. On 1st and 10, they had the pass that they attempted to Ben Sennett that something was just off, whether it was on Adrian or Sennett. They misdialed there. And then they get backed up 3rd and 23. They complete a pass for 16 yards to Cade Warner. They still end up having to punt. And then later on a 3rd and 10 at the K-State 20 when they go, and then 1st and 10 at the 25 with 1:24 to go. They threw an incomplete pass to Cade Warner. So those were your 3 second quarter passes that were attempted yesterday. And that's something that I think probably needs to have a little bit of an adjustment where keep that a little bit more balanced throughout, because like you said, Adrian starts 7 of 8 again yesterday, all in the first quarter. And I mean, he was confident. He was hitting guys. And then on top of that, the receivers who have been criticized at points this year, they made plays for him yesterday, or they at least got enough yards to kind of make them competitive in certain situations with the football. So I would have given a little bit more of an opportunity there to try and do something. But I don't know. We'll see. Also, give a shout out to Phillip Brooks, because if he doesn't pop that pass back into his own hands, that's a disastrous thing that happens yesterday. And who knows what the game looks like from that standpoint. Instead, it turned into a touchdown. So I just figured that needed to be pointed out real quick.
Yeah, no, I look at the second half with Adrian. It's like, or the second quarter with Adrian too, and you look even deeper at his success in the first quarter and his completions: 11 yards, 10 yards, 13 yards. Then he falls down to 9 yards, 3 yards, 1 yard. But he goes again for 20 yards. It's like he's doing a good job of hitting those intermediate passes, or passes that are for more than 10 yards or whatever. And it's, why are you taking the ball out of his hands when he's finding success, especially after the success he had last week in the pass game, in addition to what he did in the run game? And maybe they didn't feel confident in the protection that he was getting. He was sacked 3 times yesterday. I know the blitz packages that Texas Tech was throwing at Kansas State for much of the second quarter were difficult to kind of pick up. Cooper Beebe talked about how they maybe struggled with that a little bit yesterday after the game. So, I think it's one of those things where a first-year offensive coordinator has growing pains. And I heard an interesting perspective about this. It's, coordinators put so much work in week over week over week on Monday and Tuesday, and they get all of these ideas and plans that they want to do and whatever, and they don't want it to go to waste, because no one wants their time and energy to go to waste. So they do things that they maybe just really want to do because they worked for it, and they're like, well, I don't want to waste this time. And I'm not saying that's what happened to Colin Klein yesterday at all, but maybe it's one of those things where he got away from what was working a little bit in the second quarter. Maybe that was voiced from the head coach on the sideline. Hey, we've got a 2-score lead. Let's tie this back a little bit. I have a hard time believing that was said because it was so early in the game, but there's a feeling out process, and there's a learning curve that every offensive coordinator and every defensive coordinator faces early in their tenure. And I think Colin Klein is just kind of facing that a little bit right now with his ability to not be so conservative, but at times still use really creative things like he did in the fourth quarter to kind of find more success for the K-State offense. And he deserves some heat, in my opinion, for the way that the game was called in the second quarter, but he also deserves a lot of praise for the way things worked in the fourth quarter. So, I think Colin Klein had a B- grade. B grade.
Okay. I think that's fine. I think that's fair. And
whereas if I was talking about the Mizzou game, or not the Mizzou game, Tulane game, D, maybe an F.
Yeah, I
don't like giving out Fs for grades. Like if we're grading players for basketball season or whatever, I generally don't like giving out Fs, but that's his performance against Tulane was bad. But his performance against Oklahoma, I was like, that's an A performance.
I would still lean towards, I think more of the Tulane issues were on the back of Adrian Martinez. Just like I think they needed to kind of have that come to Jesus moment with Adrian, and it happened. And you're fortunate enough that it happened in the non-conference for a game that ultimately doesn't really matter. But I do think like Colin had some things that probably had to get worked out there. And yesterday, I think he had to be challenged maybe a little bit at halftime and really all of the offense. And it worked out, and things are going to go in a better direction now. I think it's significant that the team is in a position now where they can have this open line of honest communication where it doesn't feel like anybody's being singled out and like there's a whole lot of vitriol there. It's just these guys want to win and they want to be able to get it done and they know they can get it done. So they're comfortable having these tough conversations with each other. So I think that's significant. And I think things are in a pretty good spot moving forward for K-State. Other notes yesterday, Chris Tennant did not miss a kick. So he continues his streak. That's 2 straight games without missing a kick for Chris Tennant, even though a couple of them weren't the prettiest. They went through. That's ultimately all that matters. Just ask the Iowa State kicker because he did not do that yesterday. So that is good stuff, but we'll kind of see how that goes on there. KT Leviston, we saw go down on the offensive line. Based off of how they were treating that and the aftermath of it, that he got poked in the eye. Like that seems to be the issue there. And as we discussed, maybe you get him like a visor next week or something to put on his helmet and go from there to see if that'll help prevent anything that happens moving forward. So that's at least good news. It's nothing serious with Leviston, so he'll be back next week. What did you think, real quick, of the offensive line play? I know that it's tough to fully of offensive linemen. We basically give it a they were really good or they were really bad type of assessment. I thought they struggled at times yesterday. Penalties also were a killer, and they were the ones committing some of the major penalties that backed them up in the red zone or in goal-to-go situations. It was a tough day for Christian Duffy. He ended up with a pretty significant holding penalty. He also gave up one of the lanes that one of the Texas Tech defenders came through and ended up sacking Adrian Martinez on. So they did not play well in that middle part of the game. But again, they picked it up late. They helped kind of create some of those holes for Deuce and Adrian Martinez afterwards. So that's how I saw it. Like, it wasn't a perfect game. It was a little bit concerning, something that you're not going to be able to do against better teams than Texas Tech. But they made up for it in the end.
Yeah, I feel like I would agree with everything you just said there. I mean, you averaged 8.8 yards per carry, which is obviously pretty impressive. But then at the same time, you also allowed 3 sacks, which is obviously not ideal. And I think you look at what Texas Tech kind of accomplished as a whole on defense. In addition to the 3 sacks, they had 5 total tackles for loss. So I don't know. It's 5 total tackles for loss, 3 of them being sacks. It's an okay day at the game for the K-State offense. Again, the blitz packages that Texas Tech was bringing were difficult to kind of counteract and to find success against in the second quarter, and give Texas Tech credit for getting creative and doing those things. But at the same time, make some sort of adjustments if you're Kansas State. And I think they did that in the second half, and it led to them finding a little bit more success than they did in the second quarter.
I know we already talked about the defense, but real quick, a shout out needs to go to Joe Klanderman for dialing up the blitz on that key third down that just kind of hustled Donovan Smith and Texas Tech. So I think that Joe Klanderman did a really good job yesterday. Again, we discussed the yards that were given up. Who really cares? You only gave up 28 points in the Big 12. You won by 9. You had a 17-point lead late in the fourth quarter. So I could really care less about the yardage that was given up because, again, they just came through and his defense makes plays. And that's what you want out of a defense. Like, we kind of thinking about as I'm wearing my Cowboys pullover right now.
How about them boys?
They thinking about like Trayvon Diggs. Everybody wants to point out, they're like, oh, but he gets torched in coverage left and right. Okay, that's fine. Yes, he does get beat more often than other people. He also led the league in interceptions last year, and I can almost guarantee you the Cowboys would say they would much rather take those 11 interceptions he had and all the yards he gave up versus him, maybe holding guys to a few less yards than what they would have gotten, and he ends up only having like 4 interceptions. Like, takeaways.
I don't know, man. I would rather have a corner.
Oh, no, because then they're just getting another play and they're going to get out there and go. Like,
no, see, I'm of a different belief here, philosophy wise, than you. Then about what I want my defense to do. I want my defense to get off the field on third down more than I want them to turnovers.
I do too. But like, I would also say,
let me ask you then. So let me ask you then, straight up: would you rather have a defense? Would you rather have a defense that ranks number 1 in takeaways, or a defense that ranks number 1 in the country and getting off the field on third down? Not that Kansas State ranks in those. Not that Kansas State ranks near the top in either one of those areas. They've
Well,
been
I don't
good, but
know.
they're not number one.
I'll twist this around and say, yeah, well, the reason why their third down numbers are so good is because they so very rarely get into third down to get off the field there. So I would take the takeaways.
See, I disagree with that because if you're not getting off the
Turnovers
field,
are fun.
they are fun. I don't disagree with that, but if you're talking about a pure team success standpoint, I would rather have an offense that gets off the a defense that gets off the field and gets my offense back out on the field on a consistent basis and doesn't allow opponents to have long sustained drives into my territory to get into field goal opportunities in the red zone for touchdown opportunities than have a defense that creates a ton of takeaways. Like, I have experience watching this from the standpoint that takeaways also aren't sustainable over a long period of time in a lot of situations. I think Iowa's a good example of this. Like, they've kind of made takeaways sustainable a little bit, but last year they had more interceptions than anyone in the country, and it really helped their offense take opportunistic opportunities. That's not a good way to say that.
Well, I do think in like this regard, if you look at K-State, like they have the guys that can create the turnovers, but they also have the dudes that can help you in certain situations get off the field on third down or make some of those plays. And like that's what I would say about the Cowboys, since they're the comparison here. Like, yes, you have a guy like Diggs that will get burnt every once in a while, but also snags you 11 extra possessions as one guy over the course of the season. They then also have guys up front like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence that can get in there and make plays similar to what K-State has, where they have guys that have made plays, behind the defensive line, and they can try that because then you have disruptors like Felix Anudike-Uzomah or Khalid Duke or Nate Matlack or Jalen Pickle or Eli Huggins. Like, you got dudes up front, left and right. Daniel Green sometimes comes in and helps there. That's why I'm comfortable with how K-State's defense is playing right now.
Yeah, I'm not saying that K-State is swinging one way or the other on this. I was just trying to make it a philosophical question, and we seem to disagree on it, and that's fine.
Well, here you got to grab turnovers in the Big 12. Big 12 actually plays offense. It's not like the Big 10 where you got a couple of two-star quarterbacks farting around up there. Like, come on, that's what it's all about.
I'm just saying I would rather. That's all the more reason, in my opinion, that you want your defense to get off the field. If it's a league that's filled with offensive points, I want my defense to get off the field more than.
I think I look at it more so as it's unrealistic for them to get off the field like left and right in the Big 12. Like turnovers create so much momentum that in like a back and forth game, I think you got to go out and take it. But we'll move on from that. Big 12, look around real quick. We'll start kind of in chronological order. TCU just blasts Oklahoma 55-24, figuratively and literally. They blasted the scoreboard and they blasted Dylan Gabriel illegally. So TCU with just a huge performance. I don't believe TCU is actually 31 points better than Oklahoma. I think that's just kind of one of those weird things, but I would not have anticipated Oklahoma responding to a loss like that. And for as much credit,
Lincoln Riley yet?
Well, I don't know. See, that's the thing. For as much credit as Brent Venables got through the first 3 games, he does deserve a lot of heat for the last 2. And I said this when he got hired, and I truly believe it. There are 2 routes that things can go with Brent Venables. He either takes Oklahoma to a level that they could not reach under Lincoln Riley, which is they are going to be a true playoff team that can actually compete with people. And it's not fair to do this after 1 year because, I mean, he's got to get more guys in and whatever, but that's option 1. Or option 2 is he drops Oklahoma to a level that they were not going to drop to under Lincoln Riley. Like, I think Lincoln Riley had a very high floor at Oklahoma. I think the floor with Brent Venables at Oklahoma is lower than what he ended up having, than what they ended up having with Riley. And the other concern would be is if Venables has this offense that looks great at times when Gabriel is out there, 1, if he's out for an extended period, that's not going to be good. And 2, like, how long until Jeff Levy becomes a head coach in college football? Like, his name's hot in the streets. You may not have him after this season. So I think that there's going to be a little bit more heat on Brent Venables. And I think they lose to Texas next weekend because Quinn Ewers probably going to be back, right? We think he'll be back. And then
the reports were, I find this so funny to me. He hurts his It was an SC sprain, right? So sternum clavicle, not AC being the shoulder, I believe is what it was. I'm not a doctor. I also don't
Sound
cover
like one to
Texas,
me.
but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. The reports from the people of like Bruce Feldman and Pete Thamel, who are really plugged into that kind of stuff, they were like, yeah, he's gonna miss 2-3 weeks, and he's gonna come back and he'll be good to go. And it's been, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's been 3, right? Because so that was the second game of the year. So they've played 3 since then. So yeah, he's missed 3 games now.
yeah, so like if he comes back next week, that's kind of on track for him to come back. If not, Card's been find me a better backup quarterback in college football, maybe. Is that
well, he did more against Alabama than Quinn Ewers did. People forget this.
okay?
Hudson Card actually put up more points than Alabama did during that stretch that he played in the game. So I don't know. Just saying. And
Okay,
there were the rumors that Card won the job or should have won the job.
Yeah,
to keep people happy, Ewers was the guy.
So. No, you're right. But I guess where I was going with this was like Sark was like the week after the Alabama game. It's Sark is like, they all practice. They're all in practice, and he's being so like blase about it. And it's like calling Quinn day to day. It's like, all right, wait a second. You're calling him day to day. I got Pete Thamel and Bruce Feldman telling me he's out 3-4 weeks. Which one of you is going to be right?
And I had him diagnosed to be out for the rest of his career. So like we've got 3 guys there that just are plugged in and know what's going on where we're all over the board here. It could be he could be back tomorrow, or he could never play football again.
I mean, Red River next week is actually like really, really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's generally really interesting most years because it's a good rivalry game and it's 2 big brands going at it and whatnot. But
yeah, it'll be.
I feel like a lot of people going into Saturday were thinking after Texas lost to Tech, it was, well, West Virginia. They just kind of pounded Virginia Tech. Texas is going to continue. Texas
did what Oklahoma was supposed to do, and
bingo.
Oklahoma did what Texas was supposed to do.
And people thought, well, if Texas is West Virginia, that's 2 in a row. Oklahoma will probably handle Texas pretty well, and now I feel like it's all kind of been flipped on its head, and it's the exact opposite. So Red River is going to be really fun next week. Obviously, Texas does handle West Virginia 38-20, which was pretty impressive. I didn't get a chance to watch any of that game.
I did not watch any of it willingly because it wasn't close. It was not fun. So I'll tell you what I saw from that game. I saw Tim Brando looking like an idiot, which is
not my favorite,
which is par for the course. With his "Who am I?" Did you see the video of that from it's been going around Twitter, so people should go find it. But they played this game. It's "Who am I?" and they put up the silhouette of like a famous Texas alum, and they have a bunch of like clues about who it is. So it's like my breakout role was in Jerry Maguire. I graduated from Texas this year. I also had roles in this, and this, and Tim Brando goes, "Oh, that's too easy. That's too easy. It's Moore, Chris Moore." And he's just freaking out like he thinks he's got it. And they immediately flash up who it is. First off, the actor is Jay Moore, is what he would have been looking for, not Chris Moore. And they reveal who it is. It is not a man. It is Renee Zellweger, who, again, is not a man. And the silhouette was very clearly a woman. So that was great. Awesome. And then the only other thing I saw from it, unfortunately, I flipped over when some of the other games were at break, thinking, okay, maybe West Virginia makes this interesting. And it was when they were putting C.J. Donaldson on a stretcher. And so the good news there for West Virginia and Donaldson especially is they said that he had all of his movement yesterday after the game and everything. So that's good, but that's something to watch and monitor moving forward. Freshman running back for West Virginia that's been their biggest revelation this year, and he ends up going down with an injury yesterday. So there really isn't much to say from the Texas game because I don't know how much to get out of that because West Virginia, they just proved that they're the worst team in the league yesterday. To go down like that against a team in Texas that's vulnerable, you can't be dominated from start to finish. They were down 35-7 before some garbage time in the fourth quarter made it look a little bit tighter. That's an embarrassing performance, and Neil Brown is going to have to join Scott Frost in the unemployment line because I don't think that things are trending well for him there.
No, I feel like you're probably right. Now maybe he's got an opportunity to right the ship a little bit because the Big 12 is so wide open. But yeah, I don't think things are trending well for him. We talked a little bit about Oklahoma, TCU. Let's move across the Sunflower State, which I'm not currently in. I'm back in Illinois. I'm going to the Cardinal game this afternoon to say goodbye to Pujols, Yachty, and Wainwright. Kansas is legit. Okay, I've been saying it for a couple weeks. You haven't gotten there. Kansas is legit. There is no moving around this post in the yard. I don't know where I just came up with that phrase, but there's no
football. You can just say moving the goalpost.
Huh?
It's football. You can just say moving the goalpost.
Okay, there we go. There's no moving this goalpost around that Kansas State, whatever, or that Kansas isn't good. Kansas is legit.
They're solid.
Kansas can win. They're 5-0. You can't tell me that they're not going to find 2-3 more wins on their schedule. Do they get to 8? I don't know.
No, they don't get to 8, but I mean, now that they're 5-0, like they can beat TCU next weekend. The stretch of games that they're going to have, I mean, they're going to go on the road back-to-back weeks against Baylor and Oklahoma State. It's also, this is kind of crazy to me how this whole thing ends up working out, but they don't have their bye week until the 29th of October. So they will have played all the way start to finish this season up until the 22nd of October against Baylor. So that TCU game will be telling next week. They got what they wanted. College game day is going to be in Lawrence next week. Good for them. Have fun. Enjoy it. I will not be tuning in. You've lost a viewer, ESPN. Then TCU, we'll see how it goes. Oklahoma, I mean, that situation, who knows at this point? Like, Oklahoma the defense looks like it sucks.
Ran through for 2 weeks.
It looks like that's the perfect scenario for Kansas to go down there and put up points. And then the road trip to Waco will probably be difficult, and then we'll see after that. I mean, I said at the start of the year, I thought Oklahoma State was like the perfect team to go into Lawrence.
You picked them. You picked Kansas to beat Oak State.
I don't know that I picked them to win. I think I said to watch out.
If you're watching this, drop in the comments, get on the message boards. If you remember Mason specifically saying Kansas would go to, or Kansas would beat Oak State in Lawrence.
Yeah, I don't know.
I remember you saying it specifically.
I don't know whether I would have gone as far to saying that they win, but it's certainly possible. Because I just think Oak State's that team that could kind of sleepwalk through a game. And although the problem is, I don't know how likely that is now that Kansas is actually playing well. Like, it's not like you're going into the Kansas of old and it's like, oh, they actually have some players and the offense is actually pretty good, but we should still roll. Like, it's a totally different deal this year. And I guess this is where I would put it. You have to treat Kansas like a real team now. Like, you can't just treat them like the rollover game that they have been. And that's all the credit that Kansas deserves really in this, is that they should be viewed as a real Big 12 team. Like, they should be in the mix with the top 5 or 6 teams in this league, just like everybody else gets treated. They'll be in the top 25 this week. I actually feel like there's probably going to be an overcorrection to last week where Kansas wasn't ranked. And I could see a bunch of people jumping Kansas into like the top 20 now, which, if you look at it, should not be the result after a 3-point ugly game against Iowa State, but it's just probably how it goes down. So we'll see how it moves going forward for Kansas, but they are certainly off to a very impressive start. And tough thing for them, though, is the fact that Houston win doesn't look quite as good, because Houston lost at home to Tulane earlier in the week. So that was Houston. Speaking of another West Virginia coach, former WVU coach, Dana Holgerson, he might want to try and get some stuff headed in the right direction right now, because they've got problems down there. So we'll see how it goes moving forward. But that was a fascinating result yesterday. Matt Campbell, this is why I always said I don't understand the love for Matt Campbell that there is nationally, because I think if you were looking at a coach that was really one of the great ones in college football, he does not decide to kick a field goal at the end of the game when your kicker has already missed 2 kicks and you have 4th and less than a yard to pick it up. You should go for that, and you should feel confident that you're going to be able to get it. Although, here's what Iowa State did yesterday, and it wasn't a lot. They ran the ball just 31 times for 16 yards. Now, obviously, sacks account into some of that at various points, but that's a pretty poor showing. by them yesterday. So we'll see how it looks moving forward. KU was very good yesterday in their defensive side of it, but how much of that was Iowa State, who was a little inaccurate at times. Hunter Deckers ends up getting a QBR of 49.2.
That is not good.
Jalen Daniels was 43.4. He only attempted 14 passes yesterday, 7 of 14 for 93 yards. And then KU only ran for 112 yards. So very strange how the day played out. Kansas also didn't run a ton of plays yesterday, and they ended up only totaling 213 yards as a team. So a weird game, but if you win the weird ones, like, you deserve some credit for it. So we'll see where Kansas is, and that'll be a fun game, I guess, to follow along with next week against TCU, which it's an 11 a.m. kickoff. So you're going to get game day there and then immediately filter into the game, which is not on an ESPN network. It's on FS1 next week. Big noon kickoff should have been in Lawrence. They need to quit going to all these Michigan games. I saw they're going to Michigan, Indiana next week. That's three straight Michigan games. Why are they going to
Indiana? That game's terrible.
I don't know.
What the heck? I know Fox just signed a huge contract with the Big Ten to broadcast their games, but Indiana does not deserve that. Good gosh.
No.
They love Michigan. I'll tell you what, Joe Klatt loves the Big Ten. That guy loves the Big Ten. He was tweeting last night. Did you see it? Did you see what he was tweeting last night? He said that he like updated his top 3 or 4 or whatever, and he ranked Michigan ahead of Georgia, and people were on his line about it. And he quote tweeted someone. He was like, "You mean the team that struggled with Kent State and then barely beat Mizzou? Yeah, I'm ranking Michigan ahead of them." I'm like, dude, give me a break, okay? Give me a break.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that way quite yet. I would not be freaking out. Last game in the Big 12 yesterday, Oklahoma State, they got up big early on Baylor, and then Baylor kind of made it close, but a pretty dominant road victory for the Cowboys. So good job by them to take care of business. They got the benefit of a couple of interceptions from Blake Shapen in the game. The Blake Shapen hype train is slowly coming to a halt. Dude, after he had all the energy from last year, and now it's not the same level it was once at.
Man, I don't know what to think of this Baylor team. Like, some weeks I'm thinking, okay, they should be considered a Big 12 favorite, and then other weeks I'm like, ugh. Yeah. Like, they're 3-2 on the year, but their 2 losses are 2 quality losses on the road at BYU and then obviously against Oak State. But to give up 36 points against Oklahoma State in Waco is obviously tough. I think Oklahoma State's legit, man. Spencer Sanders has looked like a really good quarterback for them. We knew he was going to have to be really good this season for Oklahoma State to kind of replicate the same kind of year they had last season. Goes 20 of 29. Doesn't eclipse 200 yards, but does throw a touchdown. Obviously had an interception too, but he also rushed for 75 yards on 14 carries, which was pretty cool for him, obviously. Yeah, man, Oak State's legit. And I think if in a conference where nothing seems to be known about anyone, I feel like we do know that Oklahoma State is probably the conference's favorite after week 5.
Yeah, O State has earned that title. Next week in the Big 12, Baylor and West Virginia are on byes, and then they play each other coming off of those bye weeks. So that's something to note. So the 4 Big 12 games next week, 2 11 a.m. kicks, Texas and Oklahoma down at the Texas State Fair at the Cotton Bowl. That game is going to be fun to watch from the standpoint of somebody is going to be really upset and feel bad afterwards, because whoever loses that game will be 3-3 through the halfway point of the season, which will be fun to watch the meltdown. Then TCU and KU at 11. And then 2:30, Texas Tech goes to Oklahoma State. We at least know that that's going to be kind of fascinating to follow along with. I mean, may see a lot of offense in that game. And then the night game, 6:30, K-State at Iowa State. Iowa State now 0-2 in the Big 12. And based off of how things have played out the first 2 weeks, I feel like people should probably feel pretty good about the K-State's chances, though. K-State, we'll see what the lines end up looking like today. I would imagine K-State's probably like a 2.5 point favorite or something.
Oh, I feel like they'd be more than that.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like for being on the road,
that 6.
That feels high for being on the road, but we'll see how it ends up going. And then real quick, just like a little like housekeeping note for everybody. I will not be on the road in Ames next weekend. Alec will be the only one that is there. So Alec will take over those duties. I will be back here in Wichita for the funeral of one of my friends and college roommates. So I will be attending that, and a shout out to Ryan Anderson and his family. He's a great dude and a good golfer, better than me on the golf course, and a really crappy situation that he and his family had to go through. And so I feel for him, and that's where I will be next weekend. But I'll be covering everything remotely, so all of the basically same content for me and everything. But Alec will have everybody covered up in Ames, and then the next week K-State is on their bye. So the Wildcats will be getting their bye week coming up shortly before they face TCU. One note on that, for TCU, they do not have a bye the same week as K-State. So TCU will have played Oklahoma State at home the week before K-State ends up down in Fort Worth. Those are two back-to-back games that could really wear on TCU with the road trip to Kansas.
If you really think about it, with Oklahoma.
So we'll see how things end up playing out there. And then other notes from yesterday in the top 25 in college football, because we're recording this before the top 25 gets released today. Here are all the teams that lost in the top 25 this week. Number 15, Washington. They'll stay in. They won't drop out. Number 20, Arkansas. Lost by 23 to Alabama, who ended up having an injured Bryce Young, so the backup quarterback played for a decent amount of the game. Number 10, NC State lost at Clemson. They'll stay in. No worries there. Number 7, Kentucky lost to Ole Miss by a field goal, and that was a brutal way to go down. And then other losers, number 17, Texas A&M. They will drop out of the top 25, I would feel. Number 18, Oklahoma should drop out of the top 25. Number 21, Minnesota should drop out. And number 23, Florida State should drop out, as well as number 24, Pittsburgh, who lost to Georgia Tech, who just fired their coach. So not a good home showing for Pitt yesterday. That
Pitt
was
shouldn't have been ranked
embarrassing.
regardless.
Yeah, well, they had that awesome win against the West Virginia team that looks like they suck. So that tells you all you need to know there. So that's
against Tennessee.
Yeah, they did. I guess that's a win for them right there. So credit to those guys. But yeah, Pitt not looking good. So where do we think that the teams in the Big 12 will be ranked? I mean, KU, K-State, Oklahoma State, and TCU and Baylor will probably all be ranked when the top 25 comes out. Oklahoma State probably going to slide into like the 7 spot would be my guess.
Okay, so I would imagine that the top 3 stay the same in whatever order. If Georgia gets bumped, I could see it. Kentucky didn't play, or Kentucky lost, but Tennessee didn't play.
Well,
so I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma State moves up to like 7th and Tennessee stays put, or they both move up a little bit. Baylor will probably go to like 22-ish, 23 maybe.
Yeah.
I think Oklahoma falls out, like you said. I think K-State moves up to like that 17 to 21 mark. I think Kansas is probably like 18 to 22-ish. TCU's probably in the back half there. Maybe they get a little bit of a boost, but
yeah, I think it's crazy to think, and I don't think anybody would have believed you if you had said that after 5 games, K-State would be the second highest ranked team in the Big 12 this season, based off of the AP poll and how it looks like it's going to end up turning out. But that'll be a good enough showing for the Big 12 to have 5 teams in there right now, and we'll see if everybody can kind of keep in that direction. But that'll be something to for everybody to kind of keep their eyes on and follow moving forward. So exciting times in the Big 12. Or have you like calmed down at all from the Big 12 that gave you headaches the week prior? Like, are you excited about the league now? Or are you ready to embrace it?
Like last week when I was saying like I quote unquote didn't like the Big 12, I was saying it from a standpoint that I like to know what to expect in a sport where you always get what's unexpected, but I like to have some realistic expectations for things that are going to happen. You know what, Mason? I said, you know what? I'm just going to throw all that out the window. Let's just have some fun. Let's just see what happens. And you know what? I said, let's just see what happens in my Big 12 picks. I had the best week of the three of us. About
That's
time.
true.
I went
That is true.
4-1. Thanks, Oklahoma. You screwed me. You screwed probably a lot of people who picked you to have a get-right game. But yeah, I think it's going to be an incredibly fun league. It's going to be super fun to follow. I think there's 10 teams who are all really good. Not all really good. I totally take that phrasing back. There's 10 teams who can all beat each other, and there's a ton of parity. I'm against the Big 12 is the best league in college football. I don't think that. I think that it's really deep, but I also think that we're starting to see some of the depth rise in the SEC and in the Big 10. And then I think the Pac-12, the top of the Pac-12 is proving to be pretty good as well. And looks like Clemson might be legit. We know NC State's been pretty good. And there's some other teams, obviously in the ACC, Wake Forest at the top of that list that could also pose some issues for, Syracuse in that group as well. And in the ACC.
All right, you want a little update here for anybody interested in this type of stuff. This is according to FanDuel. The current favorite at plus 150 to win the Heisman is CJ Stroud.
Take that.
The next option at plus 500 is Caleb Williams of USC.
I would not bet on him.
Plus 1,000 is Bryce Young of Tennessee.
Alabama.
Yeah, Alabama. I jumped the gun. Hendon Hooker is next at
that might not be a bad bet.
Blake Corum, the running back of Michigan, is plus 1,800. He hasn't had to really face anybody yet in the Big Ten, so we'll see how it goes.
Iowa yesterday.
Do you know who is in between Hendon Hooker and Blake Corum now in Heisman odds?
Jalen Daniels.
Adrian Martinez.
Well, I got the right state.
Plus 1,600. Jalen Daniels has now slipped to plus 4,000, according to FanDuel.
Ouch.
For their Heisman odds. That ends up coming in behind Dorian Thompson-Robinson of UCLA, Drake May of North Carolina.
Washington.
So same odds as Sam Hartman, Spencer Sanders, and actually better odds than Will Anderson right now. So there you have it.
I feel like we're kind of on a crash course for CJ Stroud's. Now, I'm not the type of person who likes to crown the Heisman winner after 5 weeks of the year like a lot of people are, but I don't see CJ Stroud's offensive production slipping at all. And I think that generally means that he's going to have a pretty good chance at winning the Heisman.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't think anything's going to change in that situation. It also helps. We've gone to this like idea that it's all narrative based in sports, where as long as you have the narrative, like you're going to be the MVP or the Heisman, that goes a long way. Like it seems like in the NBA, we know who the MVP is 2 weeks into the season because the narrative is there. Looking at the schedule for Ohio State, they do not play another ranked team until October 29th against Penn State. And then they will not play another ranked team until the end of the year against Michigan. So they only have 2 ranked teams on their schedule. Michigan State looks terrible now. That's who they have next weekend. Their bye week. Iowa comes to Columbus, and they're probably going to get boat raced. And then Penn State, Northwestern, Indiana, Maryland, Michigan. So
what a soft back half of the schedule for Ohio State.
They had a soft front half too. Notre Dame, Arkansas State, Toledo, Wisconsin, and Rutgers.
Well, yeah, and we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here quickly. But Notre Dame was supposed to be better. Wisconsin was supposed to be better. Look at my alma mater upsetting the Badgers. There we go. Michigan State was supposed to be better. Now Michigan State's terrible. Iowa was probably supposed to be a little bit better than people expected them to be. Penn State's legitimately really good, I think. They kind of struggled a little bit and played with their food last week against Northwestern, but they did end up handling their business. Northwestern is obviously terrible. Indiana is not great.
Although, don't sleep on Northwestern. They are tied for first in the Big Ten West.
With who, Mason?
Nebraska, Purdue, Illinois, Minnesota, and Iowa.
God, what a fun division to follow.
Wisconsin is 0-2. They're the only team that doesn't have a win in the Big Ten West.
It's kind of, you know what it is? It's kind of like a mini version of the Big 12, but not as good or fun to watch because they play football like it's 2002, not 2022.
I about said, who did Northwestern beat? And then I totally forgot that they won that first game of the season against Nebraska.
In Ireland.
Yeah. Are you kicking yourself for Illinois not beating Indiana a couple weeks ago? Like, that has to suck.
No, that's a really bad loss because I think they turned it over 4 times in that game. They really dominated that entire game, but then Indiana got a touchdown on the last drive of the game with a few seconds left in the action. And Illinois wasn't able to come down the field and give themselves a chance to win. So yeah, that's a bad loss because Illinois would be 5-0, and I think similar-ish to Kansas. Terrible program of the last decade. You pick up some momentum there, and those kind of conversations, and people are talking about, like you said yesterday on the concourse, it feels like 2007 again in some aspects with Kansas being 5-0. That was the last time Illinois had a very memorable year. Kentucky had a really memorable year that season as well.
Yeah.
USF, I believe, also had a pretty crazy year. I'd have to go back and look.
The only one that isn't hopefully K-State doesn't replicate their 2007 season because it was not good how that season ended up going down. They went 5-7. And they started the year 4-2, but wasn't great how that whole thing played out. So we'll watch. We'll keep an eye on that, see how things go the rest of the way. But it is going to be very, very exciting to kind of follow along and see how college football plays out. We will step aside, be ready for the top 25 to come out today, and how everything progresses from that point. Should be at least entertaining to see how everything stands out and where the Big 12 gets to go from here. One last thing to put in the back of everybody's heads. I would say that right now, I don't have a confident number one in college football. I just want to put this out there because it was asked to us who should be number one. I don't know. I mean, Georgia, you got to be a little bit better than that. I still think it's probably them because they've looked better at various points, but good night.
There's a clear
you can't do that
three
against Missouri. Missouri's terrible.
No, I will say this, and we can get out of here. There's a very clear top three between Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State, but Bryce Young going out for Alabama obviously complicates things just a little bit. Georgia has kind of played with their food for back-to-back weeks, and that's obviously concerning if you're a Dogs fan, and you definitely can't do that against a Mizzou team that might not win a big or SEC game, excuse me. But Jaden Milroe comes in for Bama and kind of leads them to a win. But there's a real case for Ohio State being the best team in America if people wanted to make that case because their defense looks a little bit more legit under Jim Knowles. They're not soft like they were last year, and we do know they have the best offense in the country. So there's a real case for the Buckeyes.
We'll see how it all ends up playing out. Enjoy Albert and his final game at Busch Stadium today. I guess Yadier Molina will be there, but they throw him in the lineup. I don't think he's actually playing still. I don't know that that's what we can call it, but he's there. He's having fun.
I don't appreciate this.
I don't know. I'm not as big of a Yadier Molina guy as some.
All right, we're going to get out of here before we get into a little bit of a fight here, all right?
I don't know about him. I don't know. He's with the Cardinals for a long time. Good for him. And he had some good seasons, but he's slower than molasses, and I don't know that he provides much anymore other than just being like an old dude that's there. It was kind of ridiculous when he took 90 days off in the middle of the season to go celebrate with his basketball team he owns. That seems a little...
I didn't love that, but it was also one of those things where he was battling some knee issues, which I feel like we can all kind of sympathize with considering the guy's been squatting for 18 seasons.
Yeah, I don't know. Good for him. Enjoy Albert and his final game. Is he sitting at 701 right now?
Yes, he is. So, hopefully I see 702.
Yeah, 702 coming your way at some point today, I would imagine, for the Alec Busse effect. And that'll do it for us, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
Peace out, y'all.